Daf Yomi, tractate Menachot, Menachos. Just getting used to this new tractate. It's a different vibe than Zvachin. What do you think? It's a different energy. And so we're starting Menachos 3, but the bottom of 2b, just for context where we left off, that the Gemara was asking if recognizably false intent does not disqualify an offering, then a burnt offering where a priest squeezed its blood above the red line for the sake of a burnt sin offering should effect acceptance, as the actions performed on it prove that it is a burnt offering. The burnt offering is above the red line and a sin offering is below. I think sin is above the red line. Okay, so what are they saying here? The actions performed on it prove that that is a burnt offering, because if it is in fact a burnt sin offering, he would have performed the required act of holding the body of the bird and sprinkling its blood below the red line. Oh yeah, I guess the burnt offering is above the red line. Okay. Instead of squeezing out its blood above that line. Okay. So that finishes off 2b, and now we're on the top of 3a with the word Amri. Amri. Dil ma mitzvoi devar sozahu, dil ma mitzvadam b'chol makom, b'mizbeach k'sheiro. The Gemara responds, this is not considered recognizably false intent. As people might say, perhaps it is actually a sin offering, and he has already sprinkled its blood below the red line. And as for the fact that he squeezed its blood above the red line, they will say, it is the squeezing that follows sprinkling, which may be performed above the red line, in the case of a sin offering. As the Master said, if one squeezed the blood of a bird sin offering in any place on the altar, the offering is valid, since people might erroneously think that this bird is actually a sin offering. This intent is not considered recognizably false, so the offering is disqualified. The Gemara asks another question. According to Rava's resolution, a bird sin offering whose blood a priest sprinkled below the red line for the sake of a burnt offering, should effect acceptance, as the actions performed on it prove that it is a bird sin offering, because if it is in fact a burnt offering, he would have performed it above the red line, and he would have performed the act of squeezing instead of sprinkling. The Gemara responds, indeed, according to Rabbi Shimon, such a bird offering effects acceptance and fulfills the obligation of the owner. In fact, burnt offerings were not discussed by Rabbi Shimon at all. Rather, he said, because meal offerings are not similar to slaughtered offerings, which means that they are not similar to slaughtered animal offerings, but he did not say that they are not similar to burnt offerings. The Gemara asks, but if so, then offerings of the most sacred order that one slaughtered in the northern part of the temple courtyard which is a requirement that applies only to offerings of the most sacred order, for the sake of offerings of lesser sanctity, should effect acceptance for their owners, as the actions performed on them prove that they are offerings of the most sacred order. Because if they are in fact offerings of lesser sanctity, he would have performed their slaughter in the southern part of the temple courtyard. The Gemara answers, the slaughter of an offering in the northern part of the temple courtyard is not indicative of the type of offering one intends it to be. As one can say that the Merciful One states that offerings of lesser sanctity may be slaughtered even in the southern part of the courtyard. Did he say that these offerings must be slaughtered specifically in the southern part and not in the northern part? This is, as we learned in the Mishnah, Zevachim 55a, that the slaughter of offerings of lesser sanctity may be performed in any place within the temple courtyard. Kodoshim kaim shishakut abedam Hashem kodshi kodshim lechatzom imasem ochishin alem tikadoshim galim linoni kodshe kadoshim asavun havi avi nelu. The Gemara asks, if so, then offerings of lesser sanctity that one slaughtered in the southern part of the temple courtyard for the sake of offerings of the most sacred order should effect acceptance for their owners, as the actions performed on them prove that they are offerings of lesser sanctity. Because if they are in fact offerings of the most sacred order, he would have performed the slaughter in the northern part of the temple courtyard. Amri kachigashminu me'abaru devashchadinu v'noha. The Gemara responds, the fact that an offering was slaughtered in the northern part of the temple courtyard is not a clear indication that it was intended as an offering of lesser sanctity, as people might say they are in fact offerings of the most sacred order, but the priest transgressed the mitzvah to slaughter them in the northern part of the courtyard and slaughter them in the southern part. Ihachi machavas Hashem marcheshes nami ay nikol kamisle de marcheshet amar hay bemarcheshet neder. How do I see that? Excuse me. Machavas marcheshes he umibari hu diavira sele machavas. The Gemara asks, if so, meaning if people might suspect an individual of performing the rite of an offering in an improper manner, then if a priest removes a handful from a pan meal offering for the sake of a deep pan meal offering as well, one who sees that this priest removes a handful for the sake of a deep pan meal offering might say, the owner took a vow to bring a meal offering in a deep pan, and as for the fact that he brings it in a pan is actually the meal offering of a deep pan, and the owner transgressed the mitzvah to bring it in a deep pan and brought it in a pan. Why then does Rabbi Shimon maintain that such a meal offering satisfies the obligation of its owner? I think that's a fair question. Hasam. Wow. Big Daf. Big Amud. Hasam. The Gemara explains there when the priest removed the handful from a pan meal offering for the sake of a deep meal offering Even if the owner took a vow to bring a meal offering in a deep pan, when he brings it in a pan, it is considered a valid pan meal offering. And therefore, the priest's intention is recognized to be false. As this is as we learned in the Mishnah 102b. One who says it is incumbent upon me to bring a meal offering prepared in a pan, and he brought it in a deep pan, or if he says it is incumbent upon me to bring the meal offering of a prepared in a deep pan, and he brought it in a pan, the meal offering that he brought, meaning it's valid, and the priest performed the rites of the meal offering that he actually brought, but he did not fulfill the obligation resulting from his vow, he must bring another meal offering to fulfill that obligation. The Dilma Amar Zulavi Makavas Behavi Makashan. The Gemara asks, but even so, the priest's improper intent remains discernible. As people might think, perhaps the owner said this tenth of an ephah of flour is a meal offering that I must bring in a pan, and in spite of this, he brought it in a deep pan. Such a meal offering is disqualified and is not considered a valid pan meal offering, as we learned in that same Mishnah. One who took a vow, saying, this tenth of an ephah of flour is a meal offering that I must bring in a pan, and he brought it in a deep pan, or if he vowed this tenth of an ephah of flour is a meal offering that I must bring in a deep pan, and he brought it in a pan, it is disqualified, as he did not fulfill his vow. If so, how can Rabbi Shimon say that such a meal offering satisfies the owner's obligation when the intent is not recognizably false? Okay. The Rabbanan Harinam Rabbi Shimon Kibon Demon Shimon Af Yedei Nidro Yatsa Alma Kipuata Dimana Velo Kolom Velo Shana Amazo Velo Shnamar Alai. The Gemara responds according to the rabbis, meaning according to the opinion of the Mishnah just cited. There is indeed a difficulty, but according to Rabbi Shimon, there is no difficulty, since with regard to a case where one took a vow saying, it is incumbent upon me to bring a pan meal offering, and then he brought it in a deep pan, Rabbi Shimon says he has fulfilled the obligation resulting from his vow. Evidently, this is just a thought came to me. If someone said, it is incumbent upon me to bring a meal offering, a pan meal offering, in a pan, and he brought it in a deep pan, that makes sense why he would fulfill it. But if he said in a deep pan and then he brought it in a shallow pan, if you just said a deep pan is still a pan. It's just deep. So if it was a pan meal offering and then he brought it in a deep pan, I can see why that would work. But if he said, it is incumbent on me to bring in a deep pan, and he only brought it in a pan, then that's an actual violation of his word, because it's not deep. But a deep pan is still a pan. Okay? So Rabbi Shimon says exactly that. He says, not so many words, but he says, if someone says to a vow, saying it's incumbent upon me to bring a pan meal offering, and he brought a deep pan, Rabbi Shimon says he has filled even the obligation resulting from his vow. Evidently, the designation of the vessel for a meal offering is nothing according to Rabbi Shimon, and there is no difference in this regard whether he said this is a particular. There's no difference whether he said this is for a particular type of meal offering, and there's no difference whether he said it is incumbent upon me to bring a particular meal offering. In both instances, the unique actions of each particular meal offering prove its identity, and therefore the owner fulfills its obligation, regardless of the priest's improper intent. The Gemara asks, if that is so, then in the case where the manner of preparation proves the identity of an offering, the owner fulfills his obligation, then a burnt offering that one slaughtered for the sake of a sin offering should affect acceptance. His actions prove that it is a burnt offering. As this, a burnt offering is always male, and that, a sin offering, is female. The Gemara answers, since there is one sin offering to go to a nasi which is male, it is unknown whether this animal was a burnt offering or the sin offering of the Nasi and its gender is not conclusive proof. Okay? Amar Hashem Chadash Yachid Ma'ika Lemema Visu Chadash Yachid Yishachat Hashem Oile Tiratze Tiratze Tegeh Oile Zacha Mikasya Valia. The Gemara continues to ask, but in a case where one said, I am hereby slaughtering this animal for the sake of a sin offering of an individual, which is always female, what can be said? Since a male animal cannot be mistaken for such a sin offering, why doesn't? This burnt offering satisfies the obligation of the owner, and furthermore, a sin offering of an individual that one slaughtered for the sake of a burnt offering should affect acceptance, as such a sin offering is always female, and a burnt offering is always male. The Gemara responds, it is difficult to discern whether a lamb is male or female, as its genitals are covered by its tail. Accordingly, its gender is not considered proof of the type of offering being sacrificed. The Gemara asks, this for example, on the case where one brought a female lamb as an offering, as his tail makes it difficult to discern its gender. But in the case where he brought a female goat, what can be said? Its gender is easily recognized, as goats do not have tails that cover their genitals. The Gemara answers, rather discerning between males and females is not in people's minds, meaning they do not take notice of the offering's gender, and therefore this aspect of an animal is not considered discernible. Passage on Hashem Asham Dirase Tehai Ben Shana Tehai Ben Shtaim Kevin Diga Asham Nazil Asham B'Toy Rana P'Sigalei. The Gemara continues to challenge the opinion of Rabbah. A paschal offering that one slaughtered for the sake of a guilt offering should affect acceptance, as this, the paschal offering, is in its first year, and that, a guilt offering, is in its second year. The Gemara answers, since there are two guilt offerings that are brought from lambs in their first year, meaning the guilt offering of a Nazarite, see Numbers 6:12, and the guilt offering of a leper, see Leviticus 14:10, it is not definitively clear to an onlooker what type of offering this lamb is. Amar l'shuma sham gzelos l'shuma sham mehilos ma'ika lemema v'su hasham gzelos l'sham mehilos שרתם לשום פסח לירצו, לפסח בן שניים, והני בן שתי שנים. The Gemara asks, but if one said, I am hereby slaughtering this lamb for the sake of a guilt offering for robbery, or if he said, I am slaughtering it for the sake of a guilt offering for misuse of consecrated property, what can be said? These guilt offerings must each be brought from an animal in its second year. Therefore, they cannot be mistaken for a paschal offering, which is in its first year. And furthermore, a guilt offering for robbery, or a guilt offering for misuse of consecrated property that one slaughtered for the sake of a paschal offering, should affect acceptance, as a paschal offering is always in its first year. And these are always in their second year. These are in their second year. Ela ben shana leben Ben שתי שנים, לעבדתה יודעים שהדאיגה בן שנה ומחזה כבן שתיים. ואיכה בן שתיים, ומחזה כבן שנה. The Gemara answers, rather the difference in appearance between an animal that is in its first year and one that is in its second year is not on people's minds, meaning it's not a clearly recognizable difference, as there can be an animal. I mean, unless you're like, a zoologist, unless you're really, with animals all the time, you really can tell whether it's a year or two. Most people can't tell. There's definitely certain animals at certain stages that you definitely can't tell if it's 1 year or 2 years old. Some are more mature, some are less mature. You could say it's around a year or two old, but you can't really tell for sure. As there can be an animal in its first year that appears as though it's in its second year, like I said, and there can be an animal in the second year that appears as though it's in its first year. The Gemara challenges a goat sin offering that one slaughtered for the sake of a guilt offering should affect acceptance. It is clearly not a guilt offering, and a guilt offering, is a ram with white wool, and that, a goat, has black hair. The Gemara responds, people will say that this goat is actually a black ram, and they may indeed mistake it for a guilt offering. The Gemara challenges a calf or a bull that one slaughtered for the sake of either a paschal offering or a guilt offering should affect acceptance. It is clear that such animals cannot be either offering, as a calf or a bull offering is not sacrificed as a paschal offering or as a guilt offering. The Gemara responds, yes, it is indeed so. As according to Rabbi Shimon, such offerings affect acceptance for their owners. We are at 3b, and we'll stop here for now.